Good morning. And so in the class, we are on the third section. We did a lot of theory yesterday in a code along app where see, my webcam just fell. We did a code along where we did a lot of code demonstrations. And so I definitely recommend, if you have not followed that code along, to do that before diving into these labs. The code alongs are meant, as I adjust my camera again, the code alongs are meant to prepare you for the labs. Be what it is for now. So in order to do the code along yesterday, you hopefully did the code along from the first week, and it was a dog walker app where we're going to have like dog walkers and dog owners, and you link them together as a matchmaking service, or what you might call a marketplace. But moving on into this lab, we have an issue tracker that we're building out over the course of this semester, and we're kind of in the third phase, phase 3, where we did renumbering some things here. This assignment combines the database you created. Well, when did we create the database? 0202. And the web app you started in 0102. So basically, you created a database and a web app for this point, and now we're going to build on top of that. And so before we get started, I want to open this up on my local machine. And if I go to GitHub, now I'm kind of switching between computers right now. And so if I open up my AWD 11 issue tracker repo, you can see that I have a commit on my GitHub from another computer that I need to pull down onto this machine. So I'm going to go ahead and pull, okay, and make sure that this is all up to date now. So now my code repo, even though there was a check here already, I still wanted to check my GitHub desktop and just make sure, and good thing I did. So kind of taking a look at it, here's our files. Now again, I didn't copy up an env. This is an env file from prior. Okay, now this is also, we deployed this once already, right? So there's like a cloud ignore file and this ESLint TRC. There's a couple new files on here from the deployment. If you did that, you'll probably see something similar. Okay, now let's go ahead and open this up in VS Code. And close that down. Now just maybe open up the env file. Looks like port 5003. And run start dev. Let's just kind of boot it up and make sure that it is in fact running, and it is listening on port 5003. And the kind of the state that we left this in was working with an array, and ultimately we're going to be refactoring this to work with the database instead. Okay, and so that's where this is going. It's the same kind of thing: bugs and users and CRUD operations with a database. And so let's minimize that, maybe even close desktop for now. That doesn't hurt to be minimized. Close that folder. And so the first thing, two things that we worked with yesterday was the Mongo driver, right? That's going to help us connect into our Mongo database, and a config package that's going to help us with different configuration settings, like in deployment, in development versus production, right? Production's in the live, it's up and running, and then So these are two packages that will go ahead and install, pretty simple commands. In fact, let's go to the terminal and new terminal. I suppose I can go here and close all my old routes from Postman. I'm not in my dog walker app anymore. It looks like I'm in my bug tracker. And if I go to list all users, 5003 user list, and just make sure I got some data coming back. So my app is up and running, and I'm in the terminal, and two packages, MongoDB and config. So npm I is short for install, config, and you can install two at once, MongoDB. So that'll install both packages with one command, which is cool with me. And if I open up my package JSON, I now see a config package, and I see a MongoDB driver package. So that's what we wanted. Set up the config files. Now, I'm going to change this, right? So that we are let's see, that looks right. What's interesting about this default JSON, I'm going to update this. A little bit to use, I don't want to use localhost. And so yesterday we did not do that. But it's, so we'll make this change to be this. The URL is db URL. Now, if this all caps, when you see that, that should indicate that that is an environment variable in your .env file. Okay, so this kind of says, hey, get your URL for your database from the .env, and get the database name also of db name. Get both of these. Get the URL and the name from your .env file. And so back into the code, I'll pull my requirements over on another screen, so I'm not having to alt tab back and forth all the time. And these files that we created have to be inside of a folder called config. So first thing, let's add a new folder in the root, of course. And again, copy and paste is your friend here, in that when we say new file, default.json, and this is pretty much, now this is localhost 5003 is what we decided on. At least I am. Doesn't make a huge difference. But we're going to get our database URL and the database name from our .env file. Another new file here. It's going to be called development.json, just an empty object. Close that, close that. Another new file here called production.json. Also empty object. And finally, again, copy and paste on this one typo and it won't work. Custom environment variables. Which, again, if you see all caps, that's kind of your sign that it's looking at the .env file. And so here's my .env file. You can see there's a lot of things we don't have configured in here. So we are going to have to configure a DB URL, a DB name, a port, which we already have, and a host name, which will be set to localhost. So let's do that now. We have debug app star port 5003. We're going to set up our DB URL equal to, and this is going to be where we need to go to Mongo's website, Atlas, sign in. Now we have different projects, and I have issue tracker v2, which is where I kind of did my work last week. And I kind of browse my collections. We see the bugs and the users in their current state, and so that is the right database. So I can click on database here. Then what we're looking for is a connection string, and so you can get the connection string by clicking connect, and then you say drivers and your MongoDB driver. So here's the connection string that we're looking for right here, and we're going to paste that connection string into our DB URL, and that'll be in quotes. Now I need to replace my password with the correct password. Again, everything's kind of protected behind a firewall, so it's okay. It's safe for me to put this on the internet because you can't get in anyways. Now I want to point out that this password is a different password for me because I have my project with all my sample data, including Mflix and Airbnb, right? And that user account is the same username, EA Gudmested, but point is I had to make another project, and therefore another username, different password here. I'm going to paste that password. Learning experience for me was to actually remove the angle brackets placeholders, right? So there's no angle brackets here. I made that mistake, and if you make that mistake, you will not connect to your database. So remove those angle brackets, the less than and greater than symbols. Okay, back to the requirements. Let's close. Back to the requirements. So finally, DB name. Now, if I browse my collections, I just want to make sure my DB name is issue tracker. Now, obviously, mine is issue tracker capital T, and so you want to obviously put in the right database name. If you were following along, it was issue tracker, so I went ahead and updated my instructions to be issue tracker like such, but your mileage may vary if your database name isn't exactly the same as mine. You have to put in your connection string, you have to put in your database name, otherwise you're not going to be able to connect. And so DB name equals issue tracker. And I don't think that's in quotes. And so next we need to bring in our config into our server.js. Okay, and our database, update the lines below, host name and port. Okay, so let's start with bringing in config. We've already brought in .env, but we need to bring in config. So, you know, if you ever, like me, there's different ways to kind of bring in these, like you're going to notice import debug from debug, and there's no curly braces around it because there's no destructuring going in. You know, you just import a variable. In other words, there's one export from this package. This debug package has one export, and you're importing it. But if you have many exports, then you have to say what you're importing. So sometimes the syntax is like this, sometimes the syntax is like that, sometimes you don't know what syntax do you need to know, so you have to look it up. And so what we need to look up, and we did it yesterday, but I just want to kind of show, you know, you're going to go to the NPM website, and you're going to look up config. You're going to find the package that you're bringing in, and I'm going to see if I Control F import. There's no import keyword here, so you might need to go to the website to read about config and see if we can get import. Sometimes they don't make it easy on you, do you? These are the people that have contributed to the config package. Interesting. So in those cases, so that's not it. Weekly downloads, there's 1 million weekly downloads, so you know it's a popular one. Quick start, here, config default JSON, So here's a require. I think if I were to dig through here, I would find it. But I've already found it in the past, and we did it yesterday. So let's bring in config as we did yesterday. Oh, we did it on the database file. That's where we did it. Okay. So this one is import config from config. Import config from config. Again, sometimes now it says it's declared but never read, right? So we went ahead and haven't used that yet, but that's okay because we're going to. So we brought in config. We haven't brought in the database file yet. Let me update the instructions to the new syntax. And let's go down here, and instead of getting our port which is 5003, from the .env file, we should at this point be able to do this, config.get http.port. And http.port is right there, 5003. So if I do this npm run start dev, make sure we didn't break anything, and it says address already in use. Okay, so what this is saying is that 5003 is already running something. Let me close. You might see this sometimes. The way to make to open up a port, and so it's basically saying here's my address already in use 5003. You got to go into your task manager. The hotkey for it is hold down Control Shift Escape at the same time. Press all three of those buttons at the same time on Windows, Control Shift and Escape. And then you're going to see background processes. You're going to scroll down to Node, M. Okay, doesn't seem to be running. Okay, let's just try again. Take a look at this here. Yeah, I could tell that mine's still running because when I hit Postman, it's still returning data. So I do have this running, and the way to close it is in background processes. It's typically under Node, MNOP, but I'm not seeing the running services here. Oh, maybe under Windows processes. No. So Grant's not having it. So apps, background processes, GH. Let me go here, Control C, yes. Just gonna close it and reopen it. Okay. Normally you can close it from Task Manager. I wasn't seeing it. Maybe I was overlooking it. I tend to do that. But now we're up and running, and all we've done really is refactored our port to use that config file. Now we can also do this: const host name equals config.get http.host, and here we can replace the word localhost. All it is host name, and that really doesn't. Again, it still says localhost, but that's a if we're doing it for port, we'll do it for host. Next step is to add a database module, right? So we're going to add a JavaScript file. We're going to keep our database code. We'll get in there and write our ping method. I had this thought, Grant, this morning. I was like, here I am talking about ping as if everyone understands what ping is. And maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's not the point. I don't think I ever explained it, but basically ping is a basic communication tool saying that like my computer can communicate with over the internet with another computer. And so it's just basic, very low level communication. Like, can our computers talk to one another? And so when I say ping, that's essentially what I'm trying to do is like, hey, I'm giving a username and password to this database on Atlas. And does that work? Do my credentials work so that our computers can ping one another or communicate with one another? So I don't know that I explained that, but I wanted to offer that explanation. So anywho, database module. So we're going to add a new file called database.js. And then in our server, we are going to bring that in. Now, maybe we do there, maybe we don't. So I'm just going to focus on database right now, and maybe we rewrite that line. Inside of database, we're going to bring in Mongo driver. And so at the top, we're going to import Mongo. Let's bring in Mongo. So import, we're going to bring in Mongo client and object ID. Object ID was that function that we used to take a string and convert it to an object ID. Let's bring in config as well. Here, I'm going to get this kind of going two screen. That's going to help me. Actually, let's just config and debug. So there we go. Okay, so we're going to bring in .env. Import star as .env from .env. Import debug from debug, and then we start a channel called debug.db, const debug.db. The name of the channel is app database. And the config file. We're going to write a function. We did this yesterday where we said, hey, let's make a function. It's called new ID that inputs a string. So the parameter to the function is a string, and that function returns an object ID that converts the string into an object ID. So function called new ID that inputs a string and returns an object ID. Does that function make sense to you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Keep in mind in JavaScript, there's more than one way to declare a function. So this is what we're doing. We're declaring a function using the arrow syntax. So that's kind of a newer syntax, compared to what's called function declarations. So next, we made this variable called db. This is a global variable storing open connection. Do not use it directly. And so, and what that means is you're going to write functions that use it, but you're not going to work with that variable outside of those functions. So our first function that we wrote yesterday was a function called connect. And we say, hey, if there's no underscore DB, then let's get our config.get DB URL, const DB name, config.get db.name, Mongo client.connect, passing in the DB URL. And then we set the underscore DB equal to client.db, passing in the DB name. And we will then say debug DB connected, and then after our if statement, we return underscore DB. Obviously, this only connects if it hasn't been initialized already. All right. Now we haven't called connect. Our ping function then will call connect. So async function ping calls connect. Runs a ping command. Database pinged. And what I'll do right here is I'll just call the ping method. And I suppose we can do that. We're going to go ahead and do export. We're going to export connect, ping, and this is just going to test our connection. So let's close. Let's run node database.js. And let's see. We are getting a connection string invalid scheme expected to start with MongoDB. So DB URL, db.url. So let me look here. DB URL points at DB underscore URL. DB underscore URL equals okay, let me troubleshoot this. Okay, in the troubleshooting, one thing I did notice is that my current IP address is not added, so I do need to, that's a function of me working in different places, so I'm going to add my current IP address, deploying your changes. If you're just doing this from your home, you're not going to have that issue. And now if I kind of go back and go back, current IP address is added, which ends in 66. No, it's not showing me the, oh, there it is, 66, okay. So all I've done is kind of just directly put that back in, close. And continue the troubleshooting. Okay, so we're connected and pinged. Now that's with running nodemon. I always forget the switch, right? So nodemon with the switch to see the debug package getting its console logs, and so that's with hard coding in my database file. That's with hard coding my DB URL. So I think ultimately my problem was let's just try config.get db.url, and that's going to look, and that it got that up and running, so you could see it rebooted and we're connected with the new command. And now if we do config.get db.name, save, connected, pinged. Okay, so now we're getting config. I think my problem was ultimately the IP address not being added, but we are up and running and we're pinging. And Grant, I don't know if you were able to get yours up and going. If not, we'll take a look.
Yeah, I got mine pinged.
Cool. So I don't think it had to do with config get. I think it had to do with maybe with the IP address. Grant, what was? Do you know what your issue was?
I just used that longer Novamon with the switch,
Uh-huh.
and I was able to get connected.
That's probably all it was. That was the second problem was, well, for me, not using the switch on nodemon. Because when we do npm run start dev, that runs it at nodemon switch. And that says listening on local port, but we don't do anything to call ping, right? So we call ping inside of database, but inside of server, we don't call ping anywhere. And so, anyways, cool. Close that down. I'll bring the requirements back over. And we are on to updating the user's API, right? So you kind of finished up step 6. Best practices are pretty much copy and paste, same stuff. And we're on exercise 1, exercising the user's, updating the user's API. Okay, we are going to resume. Now I'm going to close the things that really don't matter. Actually, I can right click, close. Let's just close them all. And save, yes, save. Okay, so close them all down. And exercise 1 is the user's API. And then exercise 2 is the bugs API. So between Grant and I'm going to kind of walk through the users, and then I'll pause and then let Grant do the bugs, and then we'll meet back in the middle at the end, I should say, not in the middle. So we defined some routes, and so here's our user's route, and you know, we're going to refactor this so our users are not in an array anymore. And so I'm just going to delete that array because ultimately we don't need that. And new user ID, I'm going to delete that as well. And there's a list route here. And we got debug here. And we're not going to return the user's array. Now, listing all users. We got to go back into our database file. The response must be sent. We're using res JSON. Use the async await. Okay, so we just need to list our users now. No problem. I'm pretty sure I have users in my database, so we don't need to start there. But what we do need to do is open up the database file. And that is over here, database.js. We need to write our first function, async function. Now, the convention could be, get all users. Let's see what we called it yesterday. Yesterday, in our database module, get all walkers is what we called. So we'll call this get all users. Makes sense. Let's go ahead and export get all users function. And we need to connect to the database. So const db await connect. We need to import connect if we haven't. Okay, so let's, oh, wait a minute. No, we're in the database. What am I talking about? Okay, const db await connect. We're in the same file, so we don't need to import anything. Const users, call it all users, equals db collection. Let's look up the collection name on Mongo. Don't know why I just don't stay signed in here. Browse collections, called users. Users find to array. Lowercase t on the 2. And return all users. Okay. So inside of user list, now we need to import our import from go up. This is go up a directory, go up another directory. There's our database.js. And we need to bring in connect and get all users. One second here. We're connecting inside of get all users, so we don't need to connect. We don't need to connect here. think that was doing that. Const all users equals await get all users. This needs to then be an async method. Async res dot status 200 dot JSON all users. And that's just assuming that it worked. Database pinged. Let's go back here, all users list. Bingo. We get our users, and those users have created bugs. And that is definitely the data out of my database. You get your data out, Grant?
No.
Okay. Let me pause and take a look. So Grant had his server. Notice when I boot, we still get this listening on port. And his went down. And so I think when we were refactoring the host name, notice we're getting a host name of localhost from http.host. And so you can kind of go into config and you can go into default and you see http.host is localhost. And I'm not exactly sure if there was a typo in his file or what, but the way I was able to fix it is like, hey, over on our server.js, here's our host name, and we're using our host name of localhost here, but I added an or, and I said localhost. And so if it is having a hard time getting the data from config, we can just say localhost. And when I added that or statement, then his server booted up. And so I'm assuming somewhere in there, there's an issue with config on that localhost. But anyways, now it's up and running. And that's good stuff. So that was the list. Now let's make sure we get the route returns the full array of JSON array, res.json, collection.find, using async await to asynchronously get the data from the database, using try catch to handle database errors and promised rejection. So so let's go back here and let's do a try block and a catch ERR. And so this is just a little bit of validation of exceptions, I should say, exception handling, right? Try catches, catch exceptions. And so there's a good chance that if you hit the database, there could be a database error, and so I put a try catch in here, and I would just do a debug user and say just log the object there. And I would res.status. Now, 200 is good. 400 is something, a problem on the client. 500 is something server error. So do a little exception handling here and just kind of return to the client that there was an error. Just send that error message back. Let's see if there's anything else I want to do on that. Okay, this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about middleware. And you know, in this function, in this list function, there's a request that's coming from the client and a response coming back from the server. So it's just communication, right? Client-server communication. And anything that happens in between the request and the response outside of what happens in these curlies, right? So these curlies are right now, everything that's happening is right here. But eventually there's going to be some additional logic, some additional functions that we're going to want to call. And that's what middleware is. Middleware is anything that executes that's not in between these curlies, that happens in between the request and the response. So when you hear the word middleware, just think, you know, this is something that's happening in between the request and the response. When you have middleware, it essentially is you know, a bunch of functions, and you know, you could view it as like three functions, and let's just pretend that there's three functions that are going to execute in between here. Now there obviously there's not, but eventually we'll write middleware, and there's going to be function A, function B, and function C. And so what you want, you got the request coming in, then it's going to call function A, then it's going to call function B, then it's going to call function C, and then it's going to send the response back to the user. And to get function A to then go to B, to then go to C, these are different functions, and you might not know the list of functions that you all need to call. So what you do is you call this next method. This next method basically says, you know, call the next middleware function that's in line. You don't have to know the name of it. And so actually what we do with this error is we just pass it to the next middleware. And so that this is a way of keeping the server-side app from crashing. And so that's essentially what we're going to do. Now this will make more sense as we start writing and using more middleware, because we have not used next. So in order to use next, you have to add it as the third option here. I haven't showed that before because we haven't used it. I wanted to introduce it when we used it, and this is the first case where we're going to use it. So for right now, suffice to say, add this third parameter, which is a function, and then just pass it next, and to realize that's going to, you know, send that error message to the next middleware function, whatever that may be. Okay, and this is going to be the syntax for, you know, our try-catch blocks. It's pretty simple for now. Okay. Now let's get a user by the ID. So let's start here in our database, async function get user by ID. Let's input, now it's going to be a string over here, right? Because I think we wrote this next ID. Yes, we did. New ID. I'll call it user ID. That's a string. And let's say new ID is const ID equals. So this ID will be the object ID. So let's give it a better name. Object user object ID, something like that. User obj ID. Now we're going to write our query. So let's say db const db users collection dot find close. I'll call this found user. If found user is truthy, res dot actually we just returned found walker. Return found walker, found user. There we go. And then we just export that. Get user by ID. Okay, so we're going to get the user ID from the route parameter, right? From the query string, if you will. Actually, it's not a query string. It's a parameter variable. So here we're getting the user ID, user ID, user ID, and I'm going to say, if I'm going to put a debug in here, let's put a user ID. Make these the backticks instead of single quotes. User ID. And now let's ping the database instead. Found user equals, we need to import get user by ID. I don't know that we're going to need to use connect. I'll take that out of there. Async await. And this needs to be async. Called get user by ID, passing it the user ID string. If found user res dot status 200 dot JSON found user, else 404 user ID not found. Okay, I think that's going to work. Again, we converted the string into an object ID. So let's kind of bring this up. Here's our user list. This is Evan Gudmested, so let's copy my ID. And let's go to find user by ID, 5003 API users. List all users. And let's throw that in there. It says, can I get response? So res.json, let's see, crash. Class new ID. New ID. Don't forget the keyword new. New object ID. So I had to modify my function to return a new object ID. Now we go back, send the request, okay. We're getting some data back, but not the data we would expect. Let's look at our query. And here's user ID. That user ID, get user ID route hit. So over here, found user equal to I'll debug DB found user, and so over here, if we see them on the database side, we're going to spit out that data. Let's see what that is. So let's hit that. It's the same data there. All right, I need to get into the properties of that. Found user dot So here's a different tool, and console dot table found user. Let's console table that and see. Yeah. So this query is not working. You could see what it's returning is an ID equal to let's see. Await. It's gonna get me every time. Await. Are you keeping count? How many times has it got me?
I'm not sure.
Well, that's okay. So let me save that. And was a problem, but maybe not the only problem, because users find ID equal to user object ID. Oh, okay. Okay, remember this, right? So find, you have to convert it to an array because that's a cursor, right? We talked about that yesterday. This is find one. Find one does not return a cursor. So find one versus find. Now, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so I had to await and I had to find one. This console table is pretty neat, huh? See that?
Yeah.
Because it was like, hey, if you just log it, you're just like, hey, this is an object. I'm like, that's not helping me. I want to know what the properties are. Oh, the properties of the object: email, password, full name, given name, family name. And I'm sure you could do that with debug. I just don't know how. So, anyways, console table, nice little trick. And I don't need to debug that anymore. Now, what I do want to do is throw in a bad ID, right? So let's throw in a bad ID and see what that says. And that's going to be a whole different set of issues. Let's go. Okay, so that crashed. An argument must be 12 bytes. And so this whole thing is like, hey, you didn't give me enough. And so it crashed, so I need to reboot the thing. Now let's run it again. And pass in an object ID of 12. There it says user ID not found. Which is what I would expect. Now it says app database null. So app database null is still just doing this found user. Found user is null, right? So it's sending back of a null value, which makes that a false statement, therefore returning that. Okay, and try catch. So let's let's wrap try and catch ERR, and then we'll just send that to the next middleware. Okay, now let's see if I throw it an 11, which was an exception, and it crashed. Last time it crashed us, but this time it didn't crash us. It's giving us an error message, and okay, it's still crashing us. That's okay. We just have to learn how to handle that. Clear the screen, run the server. Good IDs are found. So if I get the user by ID, pass that in, returns that user. If I search up this user, it's found. If I put in another, if I just replace it with something that doesn't exist, not found. I think that was the 6. User ID found. Find user by ID is up and working. Okay, what have we refactored? We've refactored the list. We've refactored the user ID. Try catch, all that. The ID must be a path parameter, did all that. Next is the register route. Okay. So we are going to find a user by email. So when we register, we destructure all the data coming from Postman and we get the email. And if there's someone with that email address already, then we give them a JSON message that says, hey, you've already registered. Otherwise, we add the new user with a creation date property and say new user registered. And so let's kind of keep all this. So here, if any of the fields are not there, we send an error message. 400 error email is required. All that's going to stay the same. That stays the same. Else if else, okay, else users array find. Okay, so instead of users array find, we're going to do a method here to find a user by email. So we need to write async function get user by email. Email will be very similar to constdb await connect. Const found user equals await db collection. And we know found user is either null or a user, right? So get user by email needs to be exported. And imported. Now we can use it. Get user by email, sending in the email that we pulled from Postman. If existing user is true, then we send res 400 error email already exists. Email already registered. Otherwise, we'll let Mongo generate the ID. We create a new user, and instead of pushing, we're going to have to write another function to insert a user by ID, or insert a new user. So we'll go back to database. Async function insert user, or maybe insert user, new user. Oh, I called it Walker because that's my notes. That's what we were doing yesterday. And we export insert user. Back over here. Now we say const did I import insert user? Might have okay. Now this result should only be successful, but I'm curious what let's do debug user results. I'm not sure. Again, what happens when that's successful, the insert command, when unsuccessful, got to take a closer look at those the data that's being returned from Mongo on a successful insert versus a failure, but we'll keep an eye on that there, and then we'll just send new user added. Okay, so like the first thing I want to test is the email's already there, which okay, so let's go to add user, which we could call register user, and if I were to put in that C Corrigan, okay, so that's good. That's what I would expect. And if I leave that out, that's what I would expect. And if I leave that out, that's what I would expect. And now, before I actually do this insert, you know, my users and my current users, list all users, they have all of these things and a created bugs. But it's not until you actually create a bug that you assign this created bugs here. So all these properties can exist without this property because you might have a user without a bug. So that's fine. You can, when you create a bug, then you update a user to add this property, created bugs, with an array of objects. And so no problem there. It does also say that you should set a creation date. And so before we test some different conditions, before we actually insert a user, on my insert user logic, what do we do here? Okay, so we do comma. We'll add another property of creation date, colon, new date object, which will default to today, date and time. So this is the shorthand. I mentioned this before, email colon email. When your property and your value are the same, there's a shorthand like that. So that's the reason for the shorthand versus kind of like the normal syntax. So new user, let's check it out. So we've got 2 so far, which are me and Charles. So let's go to add user and let's do now of the different roles. There wasn't a quality assurance. I think that's actually the role that Charles has. No, Charles was a technical manager. I'm a developer. There is a QA role or quality assurance, so I'll put Julia under quality assurance. And probably full name, we could just use JavaScript to combine those 2, but for now we'll do that. Let's see now what's going on. Julia Bradshaw already registered. Why is that? Because I'm saying email is Julia Bradshaw. Now, that means that my finding email isn't working the way I expected. So let's put that in with an email. That's a problem, but now it's telling me Julia Bradshaw is already registered. That's not the case. So I would expect that to return null, but it's truthy. Whatever it's returning is truthy. So let's see what it is returning. Debug user, existing user. So let's see what that's returning, because there is no Julia Bradshaw, but it's returning a sync get user by email. And therefore, this must be async, and that needs to be await. Okay. If I've done it once, I've done it 100 times.
Where was that async? Oh, never mind.
Yeah, up at the top. On the post route, async, and then await. Get user by email. Let's see, it's going to be right here again. Await, insert user. Okay. So now, new user Julia Bradshaw added. List all users. Send. Scroll. There's our new user, Julia Bradshaw. And back to add user. If I hit it again, now it's correctly saying already registered. If I go to list all users, you could see it did not put her in there twice. So that's add user. Grant, you doing good?
Yep, I've got it.
Great. All right. It looks like we are ready to move on to the login. So let's see what it currently looks like. Okay, so it looks like we got a email. We need a password. If it's not there, we had a loop, and we will not be, we're going to refactor that. I'm just going to go ahead and take that loop out. So if the email is there and the password is there, we need to look the user up by their email. And so we already have the find user by email. Got the email here. So let's say found user equals email, what is it? Get user by email, await, get user by email, passing the email, and scroll up and mark the function async. And then if found user dot email is the email and found user dot password is the password, expected a conditional expression, saw an assignment. Oh, double equals. If found user, then we do res dot status 200 means successful. JSON welcome back, I think it wants. Welcome back user ID. And it says welcome back user ID. Well, we'll just say welcome back found user dot full name. Welcome them back by their name. Else, well, we say invalid login credentials, please try again. Res status 400 dot JSON error right here. Invalid credentials, please try again. Then we can delete that if statement. Okay, so we read the user. And let's go to the route. Now, again, let me just put in a good user information here. We got EA Gudmestead, password 1234. That's, sorry, list all users. Login user, email, password 1234. Okay, so that works. If I log in, invalid credentials, please try again. Password is required. Email is required. And those are our conditions. Going a little faster as we continue through. Grant, you doing good?
Yep, I think so.
All right. Okay. Next is our update route. To update says the following data may be provided. So we get the user ID from the path, like before, user ID, and read that from the params. Let's send that over to await user by ID, get user by ID, user ID. Again, that's converted to an object ID on the database module. If found, then we pass all that, and then we convert. Now we need, let's go ahead and write some database logic. Let's see. Okay, so we need to write an update one method. Update user, async function, update user. Let's take in a user ID and a updated user object. Let me go back over here. Whether we get the user ID here or not, let's see, get user by ID. Okay, that's fine. So here, that's just going to be in our set block. Let's see if I can write this on a couple different lines. Update one takes two objects. First is our query, and so we're going to do underscore ID colon EQ new ID user ID. So our search does that, and then we're going to $set colon, we're going to spread our updated user and add in the last updated property of new date. Close, close, curly. Return. Oh, this is updated user. Return user. Okay, we're going to export update user. Missing an L on my collection. Thank you to my linter. That was my code spell checker. Very good. Happy that caught that. All right, back on my user side, let's bring that in. Update user. So here, We got the last updated already taken care of on the database side. So we'll do a const up result equals update. Oh, let's see, async await update user, passing in the user ID, which is a string, and the found user. It returns a promise, so we have to await that promise. And now what's this else associated with? User ID not found. If found user, user ID not found. Here, if result is good, we else res.json error I don't think we need this if else right here at this point, but okay, let's first, these are all optional fields. Let's go here and let's list our users. How do I want to start testing this? Let's mess with Julia. So here's her ID. So I'm gonna update user by Julia's ID. And we'll make up a name for her. Julia Marie Bradshaw. And before I click that, this will say user ID updated. Yeah, that's fine. User ID updated. So let's see. User ID updated, list all users. We now have a new Julia Marie Bradshaw. If I go to update a user, pass in a invalid user ID not found, that's what I would expect. And let's just put like a capital Q on there. User updated. That's good. Let's check out the requirements and see what we're missing. All inputs are optional. Uses find one to search for the user by ID. If there's no such user, it says user not found. We already demonstrated that. If there is, update only the fields using update one, set the last updated. We got the last updated property. Status 200, am I sending a 200 status back? Res.status 200 JSON. That's only useful like right here. You can kind of see on Postman these status messages. And so our update user is working. Login we already tested. Update users tested. last but not least, before we're on to the next exercise, is the delete. Grant, we doing good?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. So got that. Here's delete. What are we doing? We got a user ID. Of course, we need to write our method. All right, delete one is the method, and we're going to delete the ID, where the ID is equal to $sign, oh come on, $sign EQ. Got my curly's all messed up. New ID, passing in the user ID. Okay, so this would be null, I believe, if that delete operation didn't work. Okay, let's see. Use collection find one to search if there's no user. Okay. So export the method delete one. Import it. Delete user. There we go. Delete user. Import it over here. Bring it down here. Async. Await. Delete user. User ID. Right, hold on. Let's do this. Before we delete, we gotta see if the user exists, right? So, here, if result is truthy, you would expect res status 200 dot JSON. Now this is now user found. So I don't know if this is going to work, because what happens here? You send that over, and this delete doesn't work because the user ID doesn't exist. I got to look at basically what debug DB. What does user have in it? Basically, if I throw an ID that doesn't exist that I'm trying to delete, so if I go to list all users, I'm gonna pick on Julia here. I'm gonna go AA on my delete user by ID 5003. I'm gonna change that to a user that doesn't exist. See, it still says deleted, so that's, I kind of foresaw that, and I want to know what, again, is it, am I awaiting everything? That's my question. Delete count 0. And so delete count 0. So there is an object that has a delete count of 0. So check this out. So if this is an object, if result has a delete count of 0, so if results dot deleted count not equal to 0, if result deleted count is not 0, user deleted. Otherwise, we'll say user not found. How about that? Now if we run that again, now it says user not found. But if I change that back to a 1, that'll delete Julia. User deleted, and Julia's gone. Yay. So I just wanted to kind of show you here, this is an object, and it had, now deleted count was 1. Since deleted count was 1, and therefore it's not 0, we get that message. Very useful. Now even here, let's see, my app database, I didn't need to table that because it was actually putting the object in there for me, which is what I wanted. If I just do that, I didn't need the table, but the table actually, yeah, didn't make any difference. So now I don't need those, and now we've kind of simplified that logic a little bit because we don't need to first search for an ID. We just need to see if that delete user actually did its job. All right, Grant, so you ready to kind of take over on exercise 2?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, man. I will kind of save here and pause, and let me know if you have questions. Okay, and we're back. Grant finished up exercise 2, so we're going to go through it. First one is a get API bug list. And so Grant, let's take a look at your list algorithm.
So this is in the bug.js file, and it is similar to the user one. You're doing the await on get all bugs, and that is over here. And just doing the to find and to array.
Good, and I saw you have a try catch around that. I realized on mine I kind of stopped doing that after the first couple, so that's good. And demonstrate it, please. And you have several bugs in there, so they're all coming back. Very good. And next up is the get a bug by ID.
So this is the get bug by ID function. It is using find one, and to get the ID equal to the bug ID that's being passed in. And then I've also got the console.table in there as well.
Okay.
And here's where it's in the route. Pretty much just getting the ID, and if it comes back as truthy, then it brings back the success message.
Okay. And demonstrate that for us. So obviously we're using object IDs now, and I'm sure you're converting those on the database side.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's your bug by ID. Very good. Next one, looking at the requirements, looks like a new bug with a title, description, and steps to reproduce.
So that's up here coming from the rec.body. Error messages if anything is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then going through get bug by title to check that if it's an existing title already. This is similar to like checking for the existing email for the users.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that goes through, you create a new bug with the title description, steps to reproduce, and then a new date.
Mm-hmm. And could you demonstrate that for us? And if you send it again, it should give you the title already exists. Very nice. Very nice. Let's go. Let's see. That's after new. This is an update route. API bug : bug ID.
So this will, here's the update bug function. This goes through update one, and then you equals to the ID that's passed in, and then setting it so you're keeping all of the existing information and just replacing the new ones and then adding in the last updated new date.
So there's your route : bug ID. Get the bug ID from the params. Search by the ID. If you find it, then you destructure the rec.body object into different variables: a title, description, and reproduce. And if there's a title, you update the found bug's title. If there's a description, you update the description. And then you send found bug over with the ID, await the response, and given, yeah, that all looks good. Yeah, maybe update that. Very nice. There's the new title. Alrighty. Let's see what the next one is. And obviously, I saw in the source code we're not testing all of these different conditions of missing data and so forth, but I saw all the if statements in there. This one's classify. I'll let you walk through on this one. You're classifying a bug.
So this is adding just kind of a new set of data to the object. So first it's making sure that the classification field has been, the user has entered something into that field. So there's that first. Error message, if not, they're also checking to see if the bug ID is found. And after that, it's going through classify bug and passing through the bug ID, the found bug, and the classification that they've entered.
Can I ask you a question on that one?
Yeah.
Go back to that last file. So on line 96, we were doing that destructuring around classification rec.body. I'm curious if that works as is, or if you need the curlies around that 96.
I thought it was, but I don't know.
Let's check it as is.
Okay. And then here it's doing a similar thing to the updating, except it's also adding the classification and the two new dates for classified on it last updated.
See how it's doing classification with an object of classification called
Yes. Okay.
unclassified. I think if you put curlies around that, that'll kind of clean that up. That way it's not an object, but it's just a variable that holds the data.
Okay. Yeah, that popped up later, and I wasn't sure what caused that.
Yeah. So then you send the bug ID, the found bug, and the data over. And then over there, it'll be classification colon, and then the data will be the value that's in there. So I think that'll work if you want to rerun that method and see the results on a different bug maybe. Or there were certain classifications on the requirement document, right? I'm trying to remember the different classifications, the values.
Yeah.
But let's not worry about that right now. We'll
Oh, this one should at least add the dates too. I think all of mine have classifications from the last assignment.
What about a new bug? Can we add a new bug? And then that doesn't have a classification to it? Now it's just as classification unclassified.
Okay.
And you see all those tabs open up at the top?
Yeah.
I mean, you could save those and start closing them down, or whatever. At least, you know. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt to keep them open. I'm just pointing that out that you can close them down up there as you're done with them. All right, so that was classified. Again, I think if you go back to the lab that I kind of told you to, hey, put these requirements on the side. I mentioned that last week, kind of save that lab document. I think the different classifications were out there in a
Right.
list. They don't come to mind, but okay. All right, that's classification. That's good. Moving on to assigning a bug. This one's interesting. So let's start with this. So you assign a bug to a user ID. So you basically have to look up the user ID, and then you assign the bug to the user. Now, Grant, if you would start with our database diagram that we did to kind of explain. So if you look here at bugs, I don't know if you can see or zoom in a little bit maybe with the mouse wheel. I'm not sure if you can zoom in. Under view, there's a view tab up there. Yeah, there's a zoom in button. Great. So on our bugs, you kind of look down, you see assign to. So there was a property that says assign to, and then in there we have an object that includes the object ID of the user ID, the full name of the user, and the role of the user. So with that in mind, that's kind of the database diagram that we were going for, was an assign to property with user information in the object. Okay, go ahead.
So through this, we had to get the bug ID and also go and grab the user ID that the user was entering in the body. And then I have the error messages for if any of those aren't found, or also if the user ID is not a valid ID. And then it's going through assign bug and passing through the bug ID, the found bug, and the found user. And then after that, it's just doing the set and it's passing through the specific values from the assigned to user, such as the ID, full name, and the role. And then it's adding the new dates.
Yeah, so let's kind of break this down. Now, one minor tweak you could do, if you're looking at your three parameters, you got bug ID, assigned bug, and assigned to user. So assigned bug is a bug object, and assigned user is a user object. Probably the assigned bug has the bug ID in it, so you kind of got the information in there sent over twice. You know what I mean?
Right.
No big deal. And then you search for the bug ID, good. Now, the assigned bug, you're spreading the assigned bug. Go back to your bug, go back to your route, if you will, on the assigned bug route. And you got the found bug. Okay, so you're just sending over the you're not modifying any of that. Okay, so you're just sending over the bug in the user. Okay, back to the database. And I guess the interesting part there, if you kind of highlight the assigned to property, and you see how we're nesting an object here, we're creating a subdocument, if you will, that has fields for the user ID, which comes from the object that was passed in for the user, a full name property that, again, the value is the full name from the user object that was passed in, and a role. So we're duplicating data here, again, for the benefit of quicker reads, right? So when you duplicate data, you're duplicating user data. That's going to allow you to read bugs faster out of the database, and you don't have to do like joins to like rejoin the data back together. So that's awesome. That's a benefit of document databases over normalized databases. We talked about that last week. Okay, so you have a new bug, so let's go ahead and assign that new bug to a user, maybe whatever user you choose to. So crash on save v3, pasting in that bug ID, and we're going to assign that to John Doe, it looks like. And then if you go back to list all bugs, crash on save v3, assigned to John Doe. Awesome. Again, we could always modify our database design, but that's just kind of matching what we did last week. And let's see what else we got. I think the last one is closing a bug.
Closing a bug was pretty similar for me for the classification, especially. So right here, it's passing through the bug ID, the full bug that was closed is being closed, and then the whatever the value is that the user entered for that, and then updating that and adding those properties, after the closed bug.
Okay, and let's see it on the other side. Again, you got the closed, maybe putting it in curlies, I would assume. Yep.
Yeah, that was the part I said earlier. I had that object within an object.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that'll clean that up. And let's demonstrate it. close to true. Job well done, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that is the first of 4 labs in this third section. So I believe we're due for a little bit of a lecture coming up, and that will prepare us for the next set of labs.